Okay, the first speaker in today's webinar is Jenny Webster-Brown, the Director of Our Land and Water. Jenny will share Our Land and Water's vision, how we will know we're on the path to success, and some new research helping us realise this change. Then Salai Lerika will speak. She is has the new role of Kai Rangahau at Our Land and Water. Salai will talk about the concept of Te Taiao and how it's helping us all understand and make the system transformation that Our Land and Water seeks to influence. Then Robin Dines, who is a strategy leader and senior scientist at Ag Research, and also the leader of our Land Use Opportunities Whiti Ora program. We'll talk about this major new research program, which aims to identify a much greater range of suitable land opportunities and a greater diversity of benefits for New Zealand. Finally, we will spotlight some maturing research from Our Land and Water, which is the Pata Plate project, Hirni Tane from Otago University. We'll talk about this project and how it's aiming to multi-solve some systemic problems by enabling connections between urban and rural communities. Okay, so Jenny up first. Jenny, can you hear me?
Yes. Have I shared my screen?
Right.
No,
over to you.
Have I shared my screen successfully? No. Oh, darn. You're not
like
seeing
I said, the first webinar of Our Land and Water.
You're not seeing my screen? Oh, for goodness sake. Okay, just a minute. You can't hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Oh, right. Can you see my screen? No.
Not yet.
Right, I'll try again. Sorry. It's but I've got to pick a screen first and it's disappeared on me again. Why does it? Here it is here. Sorry. Oh, for goodness sake. Why doesn't it share that one? Maybe try that one. Let's take that away. Just Annabelle, I'm sorry.
No problem at all.
We tried this so many times and it worked, didn't it? Maybe I'll shut that down and I will start it up again, shall I? I want them to be different though.
Annabelle, have a look at the chat someone has put in, Michelle's put in. So it's a bit worrying.
Oh, I can see Jenny's screen when she speaks. Okay, sorry about this, folks.
Oh, right. Okay, one more time.
Well, let's just go with assume that you're sharing your screen. There we go.
What are you seeing? Because I'm seeing.
We can see your presenter mode.
Okay. What are you seeing now? Presenter mode still?
Yes.
Your notes page.
Okay.
That should work. There we go. Phew, we did it.
Oh my goodness. The system. Right, well, thank you. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Jenny Webster-Brown aho, ko kahato o tai tū te whenua, toi ora te wai. I'm Jenny Webster-Brown. I'm the director of Our Land and Water National Science Challenge. And I apologise for the technical difficulties. We practiced this quite a lot, but it clearly made no difference at all. I'd like to begin by looking at the Māori name for our science challenge, Toi Tū Te Whenua Te Ora Te Wai, because this perfectly describes the main objectives of the science challenge: to maintain and improve our land and water, those most fundamental treasures of Aotearoa, for future generations, while enhancing the value of the primary sector in New Zealand. This is the first in a series of webinars, as Annabelle said, which will showcase the vision we have for rural New Zealand and the type of research we are currently supporting to help move our country towards this vision. Our focus is very much on the agri, food and fibre system and how we can produce these commodities in a way that's respectful and integrated with the needs of the environment. Our focus is also on creating practical solutions and opportunities for those solutions to be implemented. And we see those solutions as bringing people, information and incentives together. We have to admit to ourselves that we have all contributed to the environmental issues we're facing, and we're all impacted by problems with our freshwater quality and availability, whether it's issues with drinking water quality, problems with water availability, food gathering, food production, recreational water uses such as swimming and fishing, or concerns for environmental health and future environmental quality. Often it's more than one of these concerns. In my own case, this is an issue which I've been engaged with for a very long time on both professional and personal levels. I've worked as a water quality scientist in New Zealand for nearly 4 decades, and yet I cannot safely drink the groundwater that is my only drinking water supply on my rural Canterbury property. As with much of the Canterbury Plains, the nitrate concentrations in the groundwater don't meet the New Zealand drinking water standards. So we all need to pull together to achieve sustainable land use and protect our freshwater systems if we're going to do it at a national scale. And we all need to bring the experience and the expertise we have. Developing a shared understanding of and a hope for a better future is a thread that runs through all of the research that our Land and Water National Science Challenge funds. Now, our vision of that future involves a transformed food and fibre production system, one in which catchments contain mosaics of land uses, which are resilient, healthy, and more resilient, healthy, and prosperous than today, where all New Zealanders are proud of the state of our land and water and share the value from them. And whenever I think of mosaics, I always think of the scene you see whenever you fly over Canterbury, our region where the challenge is based. You know, it is a mosaic of land, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about mosaics combining different and complementary land uses at a farm scale and at a catchment scale. If we can imagine a future like this, then we can identify the pathway that we need to create to get there. And the role of the challenge in this is to create that pathway, to establish the how, to come up with practical and feasible and economically viable innovations and ways to remove systemic barriers to change. The way we do this is by investing in research, and we direct that funding to specifically constructed teams of researchers and stakeholders, where we define stakeholders here as individuals and agencies who are actively involved in primary production and freshwater management, those who can actually use the results of this research. As with all the National Science Challenges, we have an anticipated lifetime of 8 years that began in 2016. In the first phase, the first 3 years of the challenge, we invested 27 million. In the second phase, which is from 2019 to 2024, we will invest 69 million. In phase 2, we're moving from understanding land use effects and identifying options to change, to connecting these science solutions to the factors that affect producers, societal and cultural expectations, markets, consumer behaviours, infrastructure, etc. So we're shifting from understanding to making things happen, or providing a pathway for things to happen. There is, of course, a real sense of urgency at the moment to providing pathways and opportunities for land use change, as we have increasingly stringent regulations coming down the pipeline towards us. These regulations are designed to protect our freshwater systems, and they're being rolled out over the next 3 to 5 years. The time is also right to reevaluate how we do our science. We're realizing that traditional reductionist Western science approaches often do not lend themselves to finding inclusive, integrative, and effective solutions to environmental problems. In the challenge, we are looking to blend Western science with Maori knowledge systems and perspectives to provide that recognition of the interconnectedness of all living things and the responsibilities that we all have for environment and community. There are 3 key themes within our research work plan, and I'm going to give you a very brief overview of each of them and their imperatives. So the first of these is future landscapes, and this was one of the original themes of the challenge for the research. We have around 50% of New Zealand's land area is used for agriculture at this point. And of this, over 90% is actually used for growing grass, for sheep, for beef, for dairy. If we want to change the situation, we do need a very robust plan and good information to inform land use change decisions so that they can be made with confidence. The research in this theme is designed to enable us to see what diversity is possible and to match land use to what it is most suited for, to understand and model the management of land and water quality, to allow us to make predictions about what will happen with a certain activity in a certain catchment, and to provide novel, new production systems that use healthy land and water to generate high-value products. Our second research work plan, and this is our emphasis is moving, as I said, from that first research theme into the second 2 as we look to transition into making things happen. Our second theme that I'm going to talk about is incentives for change. So how we can capture and share with producers more of the value that consumers associate with our primary production. How we can increase and share that value based on mechanisms that reward sustainable land and high value production, and enabling communities to identify and adopt sustainable land use practices. And the image here is taken from a program that we've funded and ongoing funding called Matrix of Drivers, which is looking at the influences that will drive the future of farming. A summary of global issues, trends and innovations with the potential to influence our agri-food sector in New Zealand. The third theme, and this is where we have a lot of development going into at the moment, is how we create that pathway to transition. It is research that will enable us to increase our social capital so that we can all have informed debates about alternative futures rather than defaulting to our respective corners, so that we can act as kaitiaki, being responsible for our actions within enterprises and in catchments and beyond, and to manage pressures and remove barriers to a successful transition. The image again relates to research which is going on in this theme, and it relates to taking a collaborative approach, exploring collaboration as an alternative approach to the more adversarial processes which we've used to manage our natural resources in the past in New Zealand. Under this theme, we've currently got a large research program under development, which is using place-based examples of land use change to test and extend theoretical research outcomes relating to land use suitability and scaling out from farm and catchment scale changes. I'm going to sign off now and hand over to some of our key researchers who will introduce you to more specific elements and examples of our current and planned research and provide their perspective on how a collective approach to involving primary production and environmental protection can proceed in Aotearoa. We begin the webinar series today with research which seeks to create more resilient and healthy landscapes by 2030. And then in coming weeks, we'll profile research outlining the challenge that's ahead of us, what our data tells us about our water, for example, and some of the solutions that bring people together to develop such instruments as effective farm plans and more diverse land uses. Our first presentation today is from Dr. Salai Latika to talk about Te Ao Māori and how we're seeking to embed this Māori worldview in our approach as a way of understanding the fullest extent of the connections between our primary sector and our environment. And I'm sincerely hopeful that Salai does not experience the same problems that I did. So I will hand over to Salai.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, can you all hear me? And I love the nods, thank you panel. Can you see the right screen, the presentation screen?
You just need to switch your display settings.
Okay. And now it's gone blank. I've actually lost my presentation. Okay, I'll try that again. One moment, caller. Now, presentation mode and swap presenter. Can you see that now? Brilliant. Okay. Kia ora, Jenny. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, e mihi nunu kia koutou. Ko Salai Latika tōku ingoa, he kaimahi ki Our Land and Water, toitu te whenua, toi ora te wai, aho. Thanks all for tuning in, and thanks all for bearing with us as we grapple with this new way of presentation mode. So Jenny's spoken a bit about our vision and a bit about how Our Land and Water, how our research pipeline is configured to deliver to that vision. I'm going to spend a few minutes now describing how we visualize a pathway to a transformed agri-food and fibre sector. And I'll talk a little bit about why we need this visualization and how Our Land and Water uses it to guide our investment decisions. So achieving our vision requires thinking about the environment and our relationship with it in new ways. So ways that account for interconnected systems and our relationships and roles in those systems. So in Te Ao Māori, that vision aligns well with the concept of Te Taiao, which has received quite a bit of attention lately, especially through the Taiao Ora, Tangata Ora report and Fit for a Better World. And so that really is describing the natural world that contains and surrounds us. So if we are going to see the agri-food and fibre system and our pathways to transition through this, new lens, we're going to require shifts in language, shifts from when I talk about that, I mean shifts in language about extraction and resource use, to shifts about using language that talks about reciprocal exchanges between us and the natural world. It also requires shifts in language about land and water users to being more about land stewards inside an agri-food and fibre system. And also shifts in thinking about profitability and productivity to include a broader set of rewards that benefit not only humans, but the wider environment and the systems that surround us. So Our Land and Water developed this conceptual framing that you can see up here on the screen in front of you. And this helps us to think about the type of agri-food and fibre system that we are trying to transition to in a way that can allow us to visualize the reciprocal relationship between us as land stewards with Te Taiao. So again, that natural world that contains and surrounds us. So the diagram essentially does two things when we're talking about a research pipeline. Okay, so it demonstrates the place and the relationship of humans with Te Taiao. So you can plainly see in this diagram that we are enveloped by Te Taiao and we have a direct impact on its well-being and vice versa. The second thing it does is it helps us in our thinking when we're using this diagram to shift away from siloed ways of thinking about our research to dynamic ways of thinking across a complex system, and acknowledging that that system has multiple layers and multiple players within layers. So quite a nutty thing to really think through. And I'll talk you briefly through the diagram just to help you navigate our thinking a little bit more. So te taiao, that outer ring that you can see, has 4 components: wai, whenua, āhuarangi, and koiora. That's the natural world that contains and surrounds us. Inside that is the white ring. This is us. This is where we have our land stewards. So it's important to note in Te Ao Māori, we are all considered to be land stewards, albeit with different levels of influence on Te Taiao. So that means that farmers, producers, policymakers, industry players, tangata whenua, just eaters, consumers in general, we all have some level of influence over the outcomes for Te Taiao. Next in the layers of onion rings are the elements or characteristics that determine the types of enterprises chosen and the types of practices that land stewards choose when using resources to produce food and fibre. And at the centre are the key stakeholders, or the levers that push and pull on land stewards while they're making their decisions. So it's those levers at the centre of this diagram that our Land and Water seeks to influence and partner in science with in order for us to achieve our vision. And just finally, I guess we all know that this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum, so there are bigger mega trends at play out there, but it's important to acknowledge that their existence and influence, but they are generally beyond our realm of influence and not Aotearoa centric. So why is this? Why the diagram? Well, for us, it's useful because it helps us to think about complexity of influences and decisions that land stewards, particularly our producers and policymakers, are faced with at any one time. When we can break the complexity down into a diagram like this, so it becomes, visually more manageable layers and quite plainly like jigsaw puzzle pieces, we can begin to understand where our Land and Water can influence and partner in science to have its greatest effect. So basically, the diagram's useful in highlighting, actually, I'll go back. One other thing I think that we've overlooked is that the diagram is really useful in highlighting our proximity and connectedness to Te Taiao. So, the land stewards are, that ring is very, very closely hardwired to Te Taiao. So for our Land and Water, it means putting its well-being right at the centre of our thinking when we look to commission research. So how we use this diagram is to kind of guide the types of research we invest in, really, and the key partnerships we need to build, recognising those key levers in the middle. So when we commission research, we've got a clear line of sight from conceptual framing, this framework, through the themes that Jenny has talked about, down to each project. So hopefully, when you listen to our next couple of speakers, you'll hear, or at least be able to understand, which parts of this diagram their projects are speaking to. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thanks very much, Salai. That was an awesome explanation of that diagram. Next up is Robin, who is the leader of our new Land Use Opportunities Whiti Ora program.
Can you see my screen, team? Yes, fantastic. Kia ora katoa, ko Robin Dines aho. I'm a farm systems scientist in my day job, and the other part to my job is the program leader for land use opportunities. And of course, Annabelle, the perfect week for us to speak, because as of tomorrow, our program goes live. So we're very excited. It's a real milestone week for myself and my team members. It's been a real journey for us, and a journey with our stakeholders and with our Land and Water to arrive at this point. So we'll be back next year, Annabelle, to talk about where we've got to. Today is very much an overview. So Jenny gave such a great background, as did Salai, to our program and its importance. Our program and working with our stakeholders and creating a picture of where we see ourselves. This is the first iteration of capturing our thinking. And it recognises what Jenny led off with around what our vision, the vision for our Land and Water, and our vision is about this diverse, resilient and healthy landscape, whilst enhancing New Zealand's food production systems. And I know some of you right now are probably rolling your eyes and saying, well, in the landscape we sit in, we are already diverse, we're already resilient. I think for all of us, this is about the challenge of continuous improvement, whilst recognising how important it is that we enhance our agricultural production systems. So where are we now? All New Zealanders, every one of us, want waterways which are safe for both swimming and drinking. And I guess, Jenny, we do want you to be able to turn your tap on and drink the water from the ground beneath you. And we all in New Zealand worry about water quality. I think we sometimes forget that we have excellent water quality in many parts of New Zealand. But we're also very aware of the cases where we know our water quality is trending downwards, and every one of us wants that to be different. We also know the nature of our landscape, the nature of our seasonal and climatic impacts do impact on what we see and how we respond to our world. But where we are now also recognises that we've got some real challenges. The evidence is there, we've seen the reports written, and perhaps particularly concerning for me as a farm system scientist is when I listen to the story and the journey that people like Jenny have seen through their time working in freshwater, and these international assessments that suggest our economic growth is approaching its environmental limits. So I really embrace what our Land and Water is what our vision is within our Land and Water, and how we see the future needs to play out. And my important question to us and to our team each and every day is, how do we have an impact? Because as I said at the start, I am a farm system scientist, and I think spend a lot of time out listening to farmers, and I see where they feel the pressure about changing farming's footprint. And we all recognise the demand for our footprint to be smaller. The expectations of the New Zealand people, who ironically do still want cheap food and a free education, and some of my farming colleagues describe me as being part of the disconnected, comfortable middle class. That is part of our reality, but our bigger reality as a country that exports 95% of what we produce is for all of New Zealanders to see that our vision is heading in the right direction, and that we meet the expectations of our global consumers. And that is such a massive opportunity that New Zealand has seen in the last year. It's not only about what food we produce, it's so much about how we produce it. And we're facing both external and internal challenges to our current models of primary production. And we know that at least in some parts of New Zealand, business as usual or even incremental change is not going to be sufficient to enable us to meet the challenges that we've got to address. And to come back to Jenny's point, this is a lot around how we do our science differently. It's also about our science being cognizant of the farmer's dilemma. There's a risk if our farmers don't change to adapt to our expectations and the expectation of the global consumer. And what we have to appreciate is the risk, the vision that farmers and our land stewards have in all of the risks that they need to account for. And Salai showed us so well where that sits. This is the perfect opportunity for our program, our Land and Water program, Land Use Opportunities, to have really meaningful partnerships in science and how that science is going to contribute to our land stewards as they contemplate the future for their businesses. So how do we contribute to the transformative vision that Jenny talked about at a farm and a catchment scale? And what is the role of our science in these pathways? And I do like the term because it has to be practical and feasible. It also has to recognise that the world that our farming is functioning in is changing at a rate that we could not have imagined this time last year. And it's so much about, again, the how we do it, the understanding the importance of our land stewards' vision and the vision of our consumers. So our program in Land Use Opportunities is recognising first that this is a future that is beyond business as usual for many of our land stewards. It's about understanding the new or the different options. What are these? And how will we know if we will be better off? Because we certainly, as land stewards, understand the risk. And will we be really contributing to a more diverse, resilient, and healthy future? So how can science contribute to the understanding that we've got the right enterprises in the right places, that we have this diverse mosaic that meets so many different holistic values? And this is about, as we've already heard, how we do our science differently. And it's about working in meaningful and significant relationships and partnerships. Salai has encapsulated what is in this picture. Our program and our science is aimed at being Te Ao Māori centred. It's recognising that we can achieve this through Te Ao Māori being the whole science of our program being fully integrated across all of the knowledge bases, recognising the opportunities that will come for all of New Zealand from this approach. And importantly, within this, Māori agribusiness, Māori communities and catchment groups are some of our key stakeholders. And we see this as a real opportunity for land use opportunities for our science to be uniquely New Zealand and uniquely positioned. Salai has introduced this framework. Our program is focused on the land stewards, and we've heard that land stewards are all of us. We are particularly focused on the land stewards who are operating business and entities, which each have their own unique connections to climate, water, land, and communities, and all are shaped by the outer ring. So the natural world contains and surrounds us and directly impacts on the well-beings in both directions. So it's how we go from silo to dynamic. And Salai, I was hoping that you would talk to me about these circles having no start and no end, because I'm sure as we think about what our future needs to look like, these are symbolic of our pathway too. So how will our science help? This is a lot about data on options, data which matters for decision making and enables democratic decision making. So land use opportunities will inform decision making for future landscapes through a genuinely holistic approach, which recognises that for any land area, for any business in New Zealand, there's no single solution. In fact, there's not even a top 3 solutions. Because land stewards, considering each of these opportunities that their land has, are unique. They're unique as decision makers. Their land, and they have their own cultural, social, and economic values, and sit within a unique space within the landscape that in fact no other business occupies. So these unique combinations mean we need to understand the data and how it can assist. So what we have constructed within our program when thinking about being a part of working with stewards who are thinking about the future, we recognise, and our framework here comes out from the centre of the framework that Salai has already shown us, and it recognises people making decisions about land use have social and cultural drivers that are important, and these are important at the land user, the community, the catchment, the regional and the national level. Equally, they need to consider what's environmentally desirable within constraints. And this is about relative contribution, it's about pressure load. So there's a number of environmental considerations that must be considered depending on where we are in the landscape. And then to the place that perhaps many of us default to now in our thinking, is it biophysically feasible? And is it economically and practically feasible? So our framework brings together all of these within recognizing that this sits within the wider landscape that Salai has already taken us through. So what options are there? And what data is needed to support this decision making? And we are delivering this in the next 2.5 years. And the key to this is our partnerships with our stakeholders and our communities. Case studies, working together. This is about delivering the data and the knowledge which are wanted and needed. And some of you will be chuckling now because you understand how that's quite a different approach for many of our scientists who I'm sure we understand and know the data that you want, and actually we've already got it. That's not our approach. Our approach is saying, tell us what the priorities are. And our approach is saying, well, do we already have that data and knowledge? Can we model it? Can we pull it from other parts of the program? Are there knowledge gaps? Do we need more investment? It's very much driven from the position of the stakeholders making the decisions. And of course, it's not completely straightforward. And this is where some of the really big science challenges come for us, because we are thinking from the farm, on-farm land use decision making. At that farm scale with our case study partners, we already know they're wanting to consider change at a paddock or block scale. So for on-farm land decision making, which data sets, what knowledge do we have available at that level? Then when we come up and we know that at that level, we need data precision. As we move up to a national level, we need data certainty. And we already know now, as many of you will be sitting shaking your heads going, well, good luck with that. There'll be big data gaps. Well, let's be clear where the data gaps are. Let's be clear the level of certainty people need at each of these levels to make decisions, and not just throw our hands up and say we can't do it because we haven't got the data, because we're not going to get where we need to go unless we move down this pathway. So we are tackling on-farm land use decisions with some of our key stakeholders and our key collaborators. We are also working at a catchment level where we know land use policy guidance is needed catchment and regionally, and through to having close and ongoing relationships at a national land policy guidance level. We already are engaging with our key stakeholders, and this is an ongoing part of our journey. Being part of understanding what data they've got to bring to us now, what data we've got, and how our priorities that are coming up through our case studies and the meeting of our priorities at each of the levels and with each of our case studies and our collaborators is part of what we need to navigate, as within our program, we put together a framework of data to enable informed decisions with the data that matters. So our 3-year research program is pretty straightforward, really. It's about knowledge, it's about data and tools being widely available for democratic decision making. It's also holistic. It's recognizing the importance of and bringing together the biophysical, cultural, social and economic information. It's about filling the gaps which matter most to our collaborators and stakeholders. And where those gaps are there and we can't fill the gaps within our program, it's then about saying these are priority areas for research investment. If we're to go on this transformative journey, these are priority gaps that our stakeholders want if they're to make different decisions as land stewards. So our research will help land stewards assess the diverse land use opportunities they have. We want them to feel like they are making decisions with confidence that both the whenua and its people will prosper. Our science must be part of the transformative journey. If we're to have a higher value, lower footprint future, then science is a key part to this. And when our people prosper, then all of New Zealand prospers. We value your input. As I said, this is our milestone week. It's the week that we kick off. I am but one spoke in the wheel that is our program. I suspect most of you on the call will recognise at least one of the names on the list below. Please feel free to get in contact with us directly because we do value your input. If you can't write our names down in time, please reach out to the challenge and they will ensure that we get in contact with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Robin. Now I'm going to introduce Hirini Tane, who's going to speak about our Pā to Plate project, which is part of our new Models of Collective Responsibility research program.
Tēnā no tātou katoa. Can you all hear me? And second question, can you all see?
Yes.
Cool. O tira kia koutou katoa, mai tēnei taha o te motu, mai tōku pā o Pauerua. Taino atu ki ngā whenua papa tupu o Oromahoe, ki ngā wai o Waiorohe, ki te Wahapua Waitangi, tēnei e mihi atu, e mihi atu. My name is Hirini Tane. I drew the short straw amongst our research team to give an overview of what we've been up to. Pā to Plate is quite an abstract wee title, but what you're looking at in front of you is the pā of Pauerua, situated in central Northland. I grew up probably about 10 kilometres, not even that, 5 kilometres away from this monolith in the Northland landscape, in those very same fields, fed and provided nutrition along with the waterways behind them to many communities. We have maybe about 9 to 15 hapu that have descended from that particular place. And what Pā to Plate is about recapturing some of that narrative identity in the form of food and reconnecting it with a generation or generations that no longer live there. Now, full disclosure, I'm a Māori farm boy from that Oromahoe landscape. I grew up picking thistles, chopping a ragwort, spearing tuna, being sent out to collect mushrooms, blackberries, while also trying to farm a small 30-hectare block with the old man and my siblings and my mother. Not all of us had that opportunity growing up, and we recognised early on, actually part of both my thesis and my research and my doctoral studies, as well as other research spaces, that experience was quite unique, and that there was probably a whole opportunity to rethink our Māori systems of energy being food in this instance. Pā to Plate was fleshed out over a 3-year project in the first tranche of funding with Our Lands and Water. We were lucky to recognise that opportunity to leverage that, and within that we're able to survey some of our people up home. We're at the local markets, Matahini festivals, circulating amongst Māori land trusts, or doing online polling, asking the question whether people were still interested in being reconnected to their land, given that 92% live beyond their tribal landscape, and secondly, whether they'd purchase it, or what if they're able to buy it from a nearby shop, or have it delivered downtown Auckland, South Auckland, what have you. So we took this idea and ran with it a little bit further and invested in the Pā to Plate kaupapa by connecting and contacting local growers within Northland. Our team's currently working with 7 growers, 7 to 8, and quickly realised the ambitious nature of what we were trying to do. part of, for generations at least, Māori land use, if not fostering a healthy plantation of gorse, manuka, kānuka, has long been swept in the traditional mainstays of sheep and beef or dairy. Now, while the value of those industries has been huge for Māori communities, speaking from my own perspective in Oromawe, even the descendants that live locally can't access that food. Now, I grew up in a time where we could pull up to the farm block, open up the back of the truck, and we were given access, I bet we paid for it, to some of the hogget carcasses. So my job over summer was to swat flies while Dad made our freezer full of winter foods. Fast forward another year's worth of research and working with either established growers or new growers to the horticultural landscape. We're now at a point where we're starting to ask the questions of our growers. What will this look like in practicality? What you're seeing on the screen, hopefully in front of you, is a garden outside Totoro led by Mitai Martine and his amazing whānau. The food trial that we've done with local shops has been presented alongside narratives, imagery, and identity, really. So we tried to capture that within the sayings of kai, foods, hua, fibres, even contemplating the potentiality of extending into nurseries. Kāinga, recognising that all these foods come from a village, come from a community, come from a landscape. And kōrero. What we've noticed is that kōrero element has become quite big in New Zealand's industry, not least globally. People want to know where their food has come from. They want to understand the traceability of it. They also want to understand how that food might nourish, not only physically, but nourish their identity. Once again, going back to that point that most of our Māori communities live away from their tribal background, what we're experiencing is a huge swell of people wanting to reconnect. And what we're trying to offer through this research is a way to do that physically. Those same landscapes are still there. They supported generations of interaction within the communities. But 1940s, 1970s, 1990s migrations have rendered a whole way of life invisible. The last sort of picture I'll throw up there is, this is what Northland looks like from a tribal perspective. The shot's taken from a sister project called MāoriMaps.com, and each one of those numbers represents a marae community. Each one of those numbers represents Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, where rangatiratanga was protected over kāinga, marae communities, whenua, and taonga, some of those ancestral narratives. What I'll leave you with is a snapshot of the challenges that working with reorientating our people back towards horticultural, agricultural realms, breaking the disconnection, providing immediate binding between those descendants and their whenua. It's been challenging, not least within a post-COVID, within a climatically challenging environment. That we could not undervalue or underestimate, and that water security and water sovereignty is a key thread running through all these 7 communities we're working with. Quite a functional one, but Northland's drought last year meant a number of our growers had to really dig deep, and are still digging deep in anticipation of what this summer's going to bring. On the back of that, we've got reservoir talks in Northern, which seem to be an amazing PGF support, but we're mindful that some of the communities we're working with have not necessarily been so well economically positioned. That aside, part of that represents an opportunity to re-engage with that rangatiratanga space. Represents an opportunity to engage in an avenue of development that our people have perhaps been disconnected from. So I'll leave you with that. We're hoping to launch a web-based version of this in the new year, and full feedback is always welcome. Tēnā no tātou.
Kia ora, Harini. That was excellent. Thank you. All right, well, question time now. Oh, can you stop sharing your screen there? Great. Yeah, if anyone in the audience out there has any questions they want to send through, now's the time. We've got just 5 minutes or so left. I noticed a question that came in earlier that I accidentally dismissed because we're all still learning here about whether these presentations can be shared. Yes, they can. On our website, each of these webinars has in our news and events section, each of these webinars has a post, and so we will share a video and presentation downloads there in the next day or two. Questions come in from Lisa McGlinchey. She says, I think, Jenny, you might be a good person to answer this one. She says, we talk a lot about higher value products and higher value uses of land and water. What work is being done to define what we mean by these terms? Which values and higher value to whom?
Thank you. Yes, it's a very good question. In the first instance, when we're talking about higher value products and higher value land uses, we are referring to being able to realize a better economic return from a particular product. So it is very much related to the economic value and the value to the economy of New Zealand on a larger scale. We don't very often talk about higher value uses of water, but that is actually a conversation that we should be having, because in that case, it would relate more to what are the most efficient and the best uses of water, which is, of course, not how our current water regulation is set up, which is a first come, first served basis to water allocation. I would very much like to see that conversation around prioritising the higher value uses of water, but that's not something that we have embarked on yet. I'm happy for someone else to talk about what value might mean in their context.
So Jenny, I'd just like to touch very quickly, and Annabelle, I'm hoping that in one of the later webinars, we'll get to talk about the work we did in tranche 1. Because I think, Jenny, you sort of touched on that when you said we've focused on economic value. One of the things that we have found is that even economic value has different meanings to different people. Sometimes it's cash flow, sometimes it's return on assets. And certainly when we sat down with land stewards and asked which values they wanted to assess, there were a broad range of values, and it depended in part on which sectors they were in now to some extent, but even within that. So I think the opportunity is very much around recognising that different stakeholders will have, different land stewards will have different sets of values, and so there'll be different options that work for them. Perhaps the one that we are not touching on in our program around economic value, Jenny, and perhaps you could comment about others, is that connection through to market. So our program is focused a lot the farm side of market, if you like, and recognising that a lot of the value that we're rewarded in the marketplace is beyond our program. Beyond land use opportunity, but not beyond our land and water.
Certainly the second theme that I spoke about, which is about incentives for change, does have research in it, which is about identifying markets where value is, of course, a consideration, and looking at consumer ideas of what is a high value product as well. And as you say, it doesn't always relate to economic return, but yeah.
We heard from Hirini a bit earlier about the impact that drought is having on the growers in Northland. And we also have a question here about how Our Land and Water is collaborating with related national science challenges, particularly related to climate change. So Robin, perhaps you could talk about how Land Use Opportunities is looking at the factor of climate change in those opportunities and what those opportunities look like over time.
Thank you, Annabelle, and correct, yes, Chris, we do have a collaboration with Deep South, and there is very much a focus on climate change. And so we will be, along with our collaborators, selecting the areas where we will explore the impact of a change in climate on land use options. So it's definitely part of our collaboration. And if you feel like we're missing other collaborations, then please let us know. Do you want me to go on the next one as well, Annabelle?
Sure.
The push from government and consumers to accelerate on-farm change to lower emissions and a diverse landscape. We, I think, are seeing we're at the very start of this, Ross. I think we're at the start of the need for change through He Waka Ika Noa. We know what our targets are now. And to accelerate change on farm for increased resilience and profitability, are we missing key drivers? That's part of what will come out of the Pathways to Transition work, and it will also come out of other programs that industry are running. So part of my ambition is that Our Land and Water is really well connected to all of the work going on in the space, because I think key drivers of what people need to change is absolutely key to this. We can set targets. They want to know what their numbers are, they want to know what their options are, and they need to understand what it means for their business. So people, like we all make decisions needing to understand this. So I think probably in theory we know, but there are gaps. There are certainly gaps. And we also know for some, the opportunities to diversify need deep thinking and more data. So there are people elements and there are knowledge elements, I think, where the gaps remain.
Thanks, Robin. We'll just quickly go to the last question for Hirini, which is regarding your statement on urbanisation as rendering a whole way of life invisible. What would you consider the biggest challenge in connecting urban Māori to Kai and through Kai to identity?
Tēnā koe, Jenna Rose. It's a great question, and I'm not sure if I can answer it sufficiently. Connecting people to their identity and aspects of their Māori identity is probably the first challenge, and we thought that food might be an interesting way to test this. Practically, it's financial viability for both the growers and the logistics of getting food from Haukainga to people beyond the village, beyond the nearest town, and into a more urban landscape. So that'll be the key one. I think our work now is scoping and exploring what kind of infrastructure that might look like, whether it's a web-based platform or whether it's a physically turning up to a market and having on access narratives from the home people, where descendants living in South Auckland can read or start unpacking some of those narratives concerning the people that they once were, or the people that their grandparents once were. It's multifaceted, and I'm sure there's plenty more opportunities around that one.
Thank you. We are out of time today. I see there is one more question about Te Mana o Te Wai. Just to quickly respond to that, we have a working group which we're calling Enacting Te Mana o Te Wai, which is getting started. That's going to be looking at some of those questions. So I don't think we're able to go into that today, but we will definitely be hoping to share more on that in future. Let me just experiment with the screen share. There we go. So those are some ways to connect with us if you've got any questions about what was discussed today. Thanks very much for your time and for joining us. Today we aimed to convey how important it is to consider the whole agri-food and fibre system and bring together people from all parts of the system, science, farmers and growers, iwi, agribusiness, finances, that whole middle segment, to design a more resilient system that looks after our children and future generations. So we hope that you will take something of this approach into your own organisations and maybe invite some fresh outside perspectives into your thinking. Thanks for attending. Thank you to our researchers and team members for sharing your work. We've got 3 more webinars in this series on Mondays at noon. You can find more info on our website at the news and events page and register to attend there. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming and have a great week.